Assalamu alaikum and greetings to everyone. Welcome to the Mulla Qadir Library and Islamic Resource Center, otherwise known as MARC, for our program Conversations with Authors. Every few weeks, we invite an author or an academic from the Muslim community to join us to talk about their work and answer some questions. My name is Shabir Jaffer, and I'm one of the directors here. I will introduce today's guest momentarily. Some of you may not know much about MARC, so let me give you a very brief summary. The Mulla Qadir Library and Islamic Resource Center, or MARC for short, is named after the late Mulla Qadir Husain Jaffer, who was a scholar and a beacon of the Khoja Ithna Ashari community. We have three strands of work. The first is knowledge navigation. MARC works to make Islamic knowledge accessible by maintaining an Islamic library that is available 7 days a week. We have seminar space available for Islamic classes and discussion groups. We host various children's programs. We produce exhibitions that promote Islamic learning, and we provide links to resources for further Islamic studies on the website. The second area of work is heritage. MARC works to preserve and promote learning about the heritage of the Khoja Ithna Ashari community through the collection and preservation of heritage texts, hosting a permanent wing dedicated to Khoja history, as well as short-term exhibitions highlighting aspects of Khoja heritage and the publication and production of literary and multimedia materials about Khoja history. We have an extensive collection of resources on Khoja history. And the third area of work is that MARC works to improve relations between people of different faiths by hosting interfaith events, opening its doors to various school groups and others who would like to learn more about Islam and the Shia faith. And we create exhibitions and multimedia that encourage learning about different religions and interfaith dialogue. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website at marcresource.org. You can also sign up to receive views and news of our future events and access videos of past ones. For now, let's meet our guest for today. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome the head director of MARC, Dr. Hasnain Walji. Dr. Hasnain Walji is an educator, historian, and author who has written 26 books on nutrition and natural medicine. The hallmark of his leadership is to bend this trend so that our communities remain relevant and progressive as we confront new realities and challenges while remaining true to our faith and traditions. Fluent in several languages, he has recited majlis in English, Urdu, and Gujarati across the globe and has penned many articles in Islamic journals. He has produced a groundbreaking anthropological documentary called The Khojas, A Journey of Faith. And that spans the past 600 years of its history towards the path of the Ahlul Bayt. He has authored several papers on Azadari and as an instrument for conveying the teaching of Islam as per the school of Ahlul Bayt. And he has a special interest in the development of the institution of Azadari and the Azhar of Imam Hussein in the Indian subcontinent and East Africa. He has served on many community-based and interfaith boards and is currently the executive director of United Global Initiative, an international NGO with a focus on women empowerment and children's health, and with a mission to empower more women in the tech sector in developing countries. Hasnain Bhai, thank you and welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Jazakallah, thank you, Shabir Bhai, and I'm pleased and privileged to be here.
Delighted to have you here. I guess it's a welcome back for you. But let's get to the questions right away. Firstly, tell us about your journey towards becoming an author, both in the area of nutrition and Azadari. When did you pen your first publication, and what motivated you to do that?
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. I am privileged to be talking to you today. Shabir, the journey began almost when I was 11 years old.
I'm sorry, can whoever is talking please mute their device? We're hearing you in the background. Thank you. Go ahead, Hasnain Bhai.
Yeah, thank you. So the journey began almost when I was 11 years old, when I recall an author coming to our school. And for some reason, I was mesmerized, by his talk and by his persona. And subliminally, something told me that I wanted to be like him. I had no idea at that time what I was going to write about, but I developed an interest in writing from a young age. Long story short, when I went into the publishing business in nutrition, I was approached by a British publisher called Element Books to write my very first book. And hence, I wrote the Vitamin Guide, which was followed by a series of integrative medicine books, which combine allopathic and naturopathic medicine, which were commissioned by the Natural Medicine Society of England. And over the years, I ended up writing a few books, as you mentioned. In terms of the Khoja community, I've had the pleasure of serving as the editor of the Shia International magazine, the Shia World, Living Islam magazine. But sadly, most of these articles are in files today. Shabir, magazine articles are very much like vegetables. They have a sell-by date and they have very short shelf life. The only thing that lies in the memories of my readers for the last 20, 25 years is the last page I used to write in Shia International magazine called The Pan Shop Polemics of Fua and Fida. This was a humorous commentary on the
I remember
state.
those. Yeah, I
Thank
remember those.
you. See my point? You don't remember any other articles from Shia International, but
Yeah.
so, and with regards to the subject of Azhar, obviously I've penned a number of articles, but my main interest is in Urdu poetry, depicting the tragedy of Karbala, of Marcia, Sor Salam, Rubaiyat, for the likes of the great poets like Anis Dabir, Josh, amongst others. In fact, we just finished a series of 6 sessions, which we called Azadari from Awadh in Lucknow to New York. And this was a complete
कितना
journey.
पढ़ा लिखा आदमी है, कितनी किताबें लिखी, 26 किताबें लिखी डॉक्टर हसनैन वालजी ने.
Sorry, somebody has got their
mind blowing
device.
काम किया है.
Sorry, could you please mute your device, please, whoever it is talking?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I hosted a series of seminars on the Azadari from the Indian subcontinent to its transplantation in North America. So that has been a span of a lifetime in terms of writing in several different fields.
Okay. Tell us some about the highlights of your experience as an author, an educator, and a historian.
In a 60-minute session or a 30-minute that's allocated to you, Shabir, it would not be possible to detail the journey. But in a word, I would say that the highlight of my experience can be summed up in 2 words: dogged persistence.
Okay.
Usually when you envision something, the naysayers abound. And I faced this all along to say, no, we can't do this, or we can do this. And I always remind myself of a couplet that I learned from, one of my Urdu teachers, to say, "Hum akele hi chale the janibe manzil, hum akele hi chale the janibe manzil, log aate gaye karwa banta hai." So that dogged persistence to get people to join in that journey has been a very inspiring and humbling experience. But I'll tell you that during my writing career, having lived in the UK for many years, I had not really faced racism, as it were, directly. There was implicit racism, but never explicit towards me as a person in all the years that I had lived in the UK, having migrated there from a very young age. When I was commissioned by the Natural Medicine Society to write a series of books on integrative medicine, which I ended up doing, I was introduced to a very stuffy British publishing company. Even from the name, you can feel it, to say they were called Hodder and Stoughton. And when I sat in that room pitching the idea of the books in that sort of dark wall panel room that I recall until today, almost 35 years hence, this gentleman who was interviewing me, amongst others, said, "But sir, English is not your first language. What makes you think that you're going to make a good author for us?"
Wow.
And my agent was sitting next to me, kind of almost cringed when he asked me that question. Thankfully, I had the presence of mind to respond, and that really gives an inkling of my experience. And I said to him that it's not about the English language. Any editor can do a great job on anything that I write. What I am pitching to you is being a bridge between the academics and the ivory tower out there and the consumer who really needs the information to improve their health and well-being. This is who I am. And that's what I see myself as in terms of my writing career, to
Right.
be a bridge between the experts and the consumer, be it the subject of nutrition or be it any other subject. I do believe that I try and become a bridge. The second story that I recall is MARC itself, the establishment of MARC. MARC, as you well know, that we are 10 years old. Now we're going to celebrate our 10th
Yes.
year anniversary, but COVID has had other plans for us. So inshallah, we will do that one of these days when we can. But
Inshallah.
the concept is over 20 years old. I first presented the idea of MARC at an Islamic conference, the Islamic Forum Conference, way back in 1997. But it took until 2009 for it to took shape. And this is what I mean by dogged persistence, that if you have vision,
Yeah.
if you want to do something, then you go ahead and do that. Lastly, when we were filming the documentary, and you're talking about highlights, I'm just thinking this aloud. When we were filming on the border of India and Pakistan, and this was the plain of Sindh, from what they call the Kala Dungar, the Black Hill,
Yeah.
where we were filming, and we didn't realize that we had, in fact, we just crossed over to the no man's land. And our camera was impounded, and we were actually taken by the officers. And we had no idea with my cameraman and the crew as to where we were being taken.
Mm.
And that was a very anxious moment. As we walked with the man, I tried to converse with him in Gujarati. And he was wondering what was I doing from the United States filming over the India and Pakistan border. And when I explained to him, and he said, "Why are you doing this?" And when I said that we are trying to capture this so that the generations to come after us can appreciate where we came from,
Yeah.
somehow that kind of softened him. And he said, "Take your camera, take your crew, and please don't come back here." And that was something that I learned, that when you connect as a human being with another person, become a
Mm.
bridge, then you can solve many problems that we have, on this
Right.
planet.
Yes.
So
Having traveled to Badin once, I know the part of the world you're talking about, and it's a very interesting part to see.
yes,
Okay. Turning to my third question, one of your abiding interests is the importance of heritage and Khoja identity in our development as a community. So let's start at the beginning. There is a Gujarati book published, I believe it was in 1960, which you reviewed, and it's called Hidayat Prakash. It's an autobiography of Mulla Qadir Husain, and it's translated as Mulla Qadir Husain Sahib Karbalai Nujivan Charitra. I understand that Mullah Sahib was a pivotal influence in converting our ancestors to the Shia Ithna Ashari faith all those many years ago. Not 1960, but well before that. Why don't you tell us more about him and why you think that his autobiography, the one that I just described, is important in our development and our history?
yes, I think his input and his contribution to our community is significant. His autobiography that you're referring to, Hidayat Prakash, which depicts the latter part of his life, was originally written in the Urdu language around 1900s. We cannot find a copy of that book, nor can we even find a picture of Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai, much as we tried to scour through everywhere. But this man remains a pivotal influence in our community. In 1909, the book was translated in Gujarati and was published in Zanzibar by Fazal Bhai Jan Mohammad Master, the author and the publisher of the famous Khoja magazine called the Samachar. Many of our viewers today may recall that name. It was in 1960 that a second edition of the Gujarati version was reprinted in Mumbai by the publisher of Nidunia, Asghar Wadia, and it was serialized. So that is, what that book is. So who was Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai? He was a Muballigh, he was a Maulvi from Madras, from South India. And in 1862, for reason that we don't know, he comes to Mumbai and opens a small madrasa. And then in 1870, he returns, he goes to Karbala from Mumbai. And it's a long history, and in the interest of time, I'm trying to shorten this. But he goes to Karbala to pursue further education. And it was in around 1872 when Devji Jamal from Zanzibar and Mumbai happens to visit Karbala. And they meet through some mutual friends. And that results in Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai being sent to Mumbai by the then Mushtahid Ayatollah Zainul Abidin Mazandarani to come to Mumbai, and his efforts kind of resulted in more and more Khoja families converting from this very nebulous Satpanthi combination of some Ismaili thoughts, some Sunni practices, and Shia Azadari and all that, into the faith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So that is, who Mullah Qadir Husain Karbalai was. Perhaps, a glimpse into reading that in Gujarati, and I'm sure that some of our Gujarati listening viewers today would enjoy this this little, if I may, Shabir.
Yes, please do.
Read from this. I picked a couple of passages as to how this came about. The first contact, and this is very historic because this is where it begins, the journey of us moving towards the school of Ahlul Bayt in a proper way. He writes in his autobiography that ek divas mara shagird Khoja Habib Ablini સાથે જંગબારના કાફેલા સાથે આવેલા Khoja Nur Muhammad Megji મારી મુલાકાતે આવી. Now, Habib Abli and Nur Muhammad Megji were, in Iraq at that time. They had come for ziyarah. And Mullah kind of admonishes them in a way કે તમો તો ઝયારતે અરબઈન પડીને ચાલ્યા જશો. અને નૂર મોહમ્મદ મેઘજીએ કહ્યું કે જો આપ ફરમાવો તો હું 1 વર્ષ ખુશીથી અહીંયા રોકાઈ શકું. અને મતલબ કે નૂર મોહમ્મદ રોકાયો અને કુરાન પઢવા લાગ્યો. અને જંગબારનો કાફેલો રવાના થઈ ગયો. મેં નૂર મોહમ્મદને કુરાનનો સબક આપવા માટે ઇસ્લામના અકાયદ, and this is the important part, and I'll translate that in English also because it's important, કે ઇસ્લામના અકાયદ અને નમાઝના રોજાના મસાઇલ પણ શીખવાડવા માંડ્યા. So essentially, this is a first contact between Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai and some of the Khojas before even Devji Jamal had come. એક દિવસે હઝરત અલી અલ ઇસ્લામના ફઝાઇલની વાત નીકળતા નૂર મુહમ્મદે જણાવ્યું. So when they were talking about the fazail of Imam Ali alayhi Islam, Nur Muhammad says કે ખોજા લોકો હઝરત અલીને ખુદા માને છે. આ સાંભળીને હું ચકિત થઈ બોલ્યો કે હઝરત અલી અલ ઇસ્લામને ખુદા કેવું તે શું? નૂર મુહમ્મદ પણ અજબ હતા કે ઉસ્તાદ તો હજી અલી અલ્લાહની વાત કરતા આટલો આશ્ચર્ય પામ્યો છે. તો જ્યારે હું એને 46 ખુદાઓની વાત કરીશ તો તેઓ કેવી રીતે સાંભળી શકશે? Now, this is a very important conversation that takes place between Nur Muhammad and Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai. When Nur Muhammad was listening to the fazail of Imam Ali alayhi Islam, Nur Muhammad says that we Khojas believe Imam Ali as our God. And Mullah gets, shocked about this. And Nur Muhammad says to himself કે જ્યારે હું 46 ખુદાઓની વાત કરીશ તો તેઓ કેવી રીતે આ વાત સાંભળી શકશે. Now by 46 khuda, 46 gods that he was referring to was our belief system at that time. Not that it remains the same even amongst the Ismailis, that the belief system at that time among some was that the imams of the Ismailis and the Aga Khans, the 46, were all part of divinity. So મેં નૂર મોહમ્મદને કહ્યું કે કોઈના ઉપર તહોમત મૂકવી એ ખરાબ વાત છે જો કાફર પણ હોય, પરંતુ આગા ખાન તો સૈયદ અને શિયા છે. મુસલમાન માટે આવા અદ્ભુત શબ્દો કહેવા એ ખુદાની મરજીની વિરુદ્ધ છે, તમે તોબા કરો. નૂર મોહમ્મદ મેઘજીએ કહ્યું કે હું સમજતો નથી કે આપ શું કહો છો. મેં તહોમત લગાડી નથી. ખોજાઓનો મૂળ અકીદો એ જ છે. Meaning that I have not maligned or I have not put a tuhmat on the Aga Khan, but this is the Aqidah of the Khojas.
Right.
So this is a definitive conversation that begins the journey of our community. Subsequently, and if I may read, just one very short paragraph, which is humorous in a way, that then when Devji Jamal arrives, and those of you who have followed the Khoja history will know the context. Those who haven't, I recommend that they read the book Endangered Species to actually know the context of this. But Devji Jamal arrives in Karbala for ziyarat. And as he meets Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai, there's another very interesting passage in that book. It says, Mulaqat ma khabar antar puchya baad, Devji Jamal ne puchyu કે તમે કહો છો કે અમે મક્કા હજ પડવાનો ઈરાદો કરી જંગબારથી નીકળ્યા હતા તો અહીં કેવી રીતે ચાલ્યા. Apparently they had set out to go to Hajj and ended up for ziyarat in Karbala. Jamal responds to say nasib. તો મેં પૂછ્યું, Mulla Qadir Husain says that I asked, મેં પૂછ્યું કે અહીં કયા કારણસર આવવાનું થયું. જવાબમાં દેવજી જમાલે આ જવાબ આપ્યો કે તકદીર. So first he says nasib, then he says takdir. This is a typical, I believe, and I say this with the greatest humility, that the Khoja traits of never coming to the point straight away.
Right.
He said takdir. તો મેં કહ્યું નસીબ તથા તકદીરનું નથી પૂછતો, પણ અહીં આવવાનું કારણ શું છે તે બતાવો. તો જવાબ આપ્યો કે કિસ્મત. So again he is persisting and not revealing the true intention of coming to Karbala.
So you mentioned, go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the book Endangered Species earlier on. I want to talk about that, but I'll let you finish your point. Go ahead.
Thank you. So જવાબ આપ્યો કે કિસ્મત. મેં કહ્યું કે હું કઈ સમજતો નથી, સ્પષ્ટ જણાવો કે તમે કયા કારણે લઈ હજને તજીને અહીંયા આવ્યા. Then Devji Jamal says the thing as to why he ended up in Karbala instead of going for Hajj. તેમણે જવાબમાં જણાવ્યું કે અમોએ એ સાંભળ્યું છે કે ત્યાં જવાથી, meaning going to Hajj, એમાં એક હજનો સવાલ મળે છે અને કરબલા આવવાથી 70 હજનો સવાબ મળે છે. તે વખતે મેં કહ્યું કે તમે હજી હજ શું એ સમજવા પામ્યા નથી અને એ કેવી હજ છે અને 70 હજ કેવા છે તે તમારે જાણવું જોઈએ. So basically another definitive conversation where Devji Jamal said we came here on the way to Hajj, but we ended up here. Another Khoja trait of getting the best of every bargain, to say that અમે હજ માટે એક હજનો સવાબ હતો, અહીંયા અમે સાંભળ્યું કે 70 હજનો અમને સવાબ મળે છે એટલે અમે અહીંયા આવી. And then began this education by Mulla Qadir Husain Karbalai.
Right.
So these are some of the nuances of our conversion and our. So when we reflect today on Qadir Husain's life, he withstood when he came repeated attempts to do his tabligh, but he has been instrumental in being the most definitive and one of the most influential persons in our conversion to the school of Ahlul Bayt.
Indeed he is. In 2012, MARC published a book by Marhum Hassan Jaffer called Endangered Species, for which you wrote the foreword. The book is described as an account of the journey of faith by the Khoja Shia Ithna Ashari community. In the foreword that you wrote, you summarized eloquently how our community came into existence in the Indian subcontinent and tracked its subsequent arrival in East Africa. More than that, however, you posed some very thoughtful questions about our youth and the future direction as a community. What answers have you found to these questions since then, if any? And I'll ask you to be concise, just in the interest of time, because I do want to allow other people to ask questions too. Go ahead.
Certainly. So when I began writing that forward and began editing the book, I'd like to quote something that I wrote at that time that encapsulates, your answer and perhaps the entire essence of the work of the Khoja Heritage that MARC does in the Khoja Heritage Project of the World Federation. Imam Musa Kazim al-Islam advised his companion Hisham, and he said, if there is a walnut in your hand and people say that it is a pearl, their saying will not benefit you in any way when you know that it's actually a walnut. And if there is a pearl in your hand and people say that it is a walnut, their saying will not harm you in any way when you know that it is actually a pearl. Why did I start the foreword of that book with that? Was that amongst the generations that were coming through, and as Marhum Hassan Bhai was writing this book, we saw a waning interest in the identity and the ownership by the upcoming generation towards the Khoja community. There are many factors. I don't have time to go into those, perhaps another time. But this is where the questions that I posed was that will our community survive 2 or more generations as we know it today, or we knew it then? And this question becomes all the more critical and crucial in view of the fact that the new generation is far more engaged in the mainstream, is questioning the insularity of the community, while the old guard responds by insisting upon retaining what seems to have worked well for the community for over a century. And these are the questions that, as we continue to debate the causes and the attempts to find these panaceas, it's important for all segments, young and old, to realize that this vacuum of intellectual capital can become a critical factor in terms of the lack of development, or the critical thinking can become a continued factor in the development, in the very existence of our community as we know it today. And lest this book becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this really was the message of the book and the work that we do at Khoja Heritage, in order to ascertain that the upcoming generations understand the value of that pearl that we have, despite the fact that many outsiders have tried to convince us that all we have is a walnut in our hands.
Yeah, a very important book in our history, for sure. And our deep thanks and gratitude to Marhum Hassan Jaffer for that. Let's talk a little bit more about the migration of some community members to East Africa. That was in the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries. This has always held some fascination for me because, like you and many of our listeners today, I'm a descendant of one of those brave souls who journeyed across the Indian Ocean. In the 2014 historical documentary video, The Khojas, A Journey of Faith, which you produced and directed, I heard our community described as, I quote, a people who learn to contain their faith in a crucible of culture while traversing 4 continents in as many generations, who left their villages in Western India for a new, strange and unexplored continent, Africa, some to find better pastures, some to find safe haven from religious strife from where they came. Just how serious were things in Kutch and Gujarat, based on your research that you've done? Just how serious were things in Kutch and Gujarat that prompted so many of our young men to make that 1-month-long crossing across the Indian Ocean in dhows to start a new life in East Africa? And what does that say about their courage, their resilience, and their tenacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. What does it say about their resilience and tenacity is something that I leave to our audience to fathom. Suffice it to say that the factors that led to this was the 1899, 1900, the great Indian famine, which began with the failure of the summer monsoons over western and central India. And it affected almost, 500,000 square miles in a population of almost, 50 to 60 million people.
Yeah,
Amongst those were our community, the Khojas, who lived in the area of Kutch, Kathiawar, and the rest of the Indian subcontinent. How dire were things? Most of our folks used to be landowners. They would own some cattle and some land, and they were farmers, a lot of them. The monsoons failed. There were no crops to be had. There was a severe drought. Food was in short supply. And you know what the British did at that time was to actually take away their only means of livelihood, which was a cattle, in the form of taxes. They could not pay for the land upon which they could grow nothing. This is a travesty by the British at that time. So the choice they had was either die on land or risk death over what they used to call Kalapani, the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, to
yeah,
actually go over to the East African coast and migrate with sort of life in the small ships of 80 to 100 tons, which were like 40 to 60 feet long, if you can imagine. And we have
yeah,
depicted that in the documentary, that these passengers, slept on the deck at just one glass of water, a day, because water was in short supply, food was not. And sometimes they were going to Zanzibar and they ended up in Madagascar. They had no
mm,
idea where they ended up. So this
yeah,
is how our people started their lives, in that migration from the subcontinent to the East African coast.
right, right.
And that says a lot, for the
It, uh,
tenacity, the resilience, and what they were able to do. And mind you, this was a time when we are kind of still nascent within our faith traditions as we were moving from a caste identity to a faith identity or a sect.
yeah, yeah,
So there was a transition and a transformation in more ways than one: economic, cultural, as well as religious.
yeah. I'd like to stay with that theme of early pioneers and their qualities. I was born in Kampala, Uganda, as you know, and there the names of Ali Dina Visram and his partner Nasser Rirji were known as early pioneers, and indeed some of their descendants lived and worked in Kampala. These are men who ventured beyond the African coast. They didn't just hang around on the coastal side; they actually penetrated the interior. They were undeterred by snakes and wild animals and who knows and God knows what else. Men like them established trading routes. They supplied the dukas and dukawalas who followed them. Do you think there was more to these remarkable endeavors than just plain entrepreneurialism?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, there was kind of a spirit of trade and business, because Gujaratis had always ventured out for trade, long before uh, anybody else had, from that part of the world. So they were in Burma, they were all over the place, including East Africa, long before the Europeans came to the East African coast. Alidina Visram and Nasser Virji, for example, a phenomenal partnership of an Ismaili Khoja and an Ithna Ashari Khoja.
Mm.
They ventured inland from Zanzibar onwards. By the way, Alidina Visram was an orphan who came as a stowaway from Kera to Mandwi and then on to Zanzibar. And his
That was
story is
remarkable.
just his
Yeah.
story is just phenomenal. But
Mm.
Cyril Enright, writing about the Uganda economy, says this in a word, that perhaps the most important individual in the early history in East Africa, Sheikh Alidina Visram, was responsible for laying the firm foundation not only of trade in Uganda, but of such industries as cotton, sugar, rubber, tea, etc.,
Yeah.
as well as shipping across Lake Victoria. This spirit had two things that I believe where the partnerships thrive. One was the absolute total integrity of these business people. You could rely on their words. You know, the hundi, the letter of credit that was issued by them could become a currency for people to exchange to say, this is a hundi from Alidina Visram or Nasir Virji, and this is how valuable it is. So it was their integrity. And there was also a sense of fair play, you know, in their business acumen, which, you know, sometimes one feels lacking when we look at, you know, the development of the community. I'm not making a value judgment here, but
Yeah.
in those days, it was these two ideas of integrity and fair play. And of course, that spirit of dogged persistence that we have learned where they were able to succeed in this. Sadly, they're forgotten. Interestingly, the book that I read about Aldina Visram is a fiction fact by M.G. Visram, no relation to him, says that if Alidina Visram were to wake up in Mombasa, where his statue is, he would find that what took him 6 months of traveling to cover his shops from coast to coast from the furthest part of the interior would now be traversed in an hour or two in a plane. And if you ask somebody who is Alidina Visram, the people in Mombasa would probably tell you that you mean where is Alidina Visram? Because the only thing that survives is the Alidina Visram school, and people know that school. They don't know the man as to who he
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Even the
That's
street names have changed, haven't they? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Giants among men, I would say. I would probably describe them. Okay.
Absolutely.
For the next question, I would ask the ladies who are listening in to pay particular attention because this will certainly interest you. The documentary that I referred to earlier on, the Khojas, A Journey of Faith, that documentary refers to the women of that time as unsung heroines who played a silent but crucial role in making the community. It talked of women patiently bearing the brunt of family tensions as wives who waited for years for their husbands to return to India from East Africa and take them back with them. It also talked about mothers who sold their jewelry to fund their sons' trips to East Africa. But Hasnain Bhai, what about the women who actually landed in Africa and accompanied their husbands, their fathers, and brothers into the interior to help them set up shop, as it were? What do we know about them and their lives? Is there much information about that? Can you speculate? If not, can you speculate what kind of life they led?
We generally, Shabir, the documentation of our history,
Yeah.
there's a paucity of documentation. However, having said that, you know, there are some accounts and there are some anecdotes that one can refer to. Absolutely, you're right. Um, Sultan Somji, who is based in Vancouver, wrote a book called Beat By. I recommend that our audience reads that book. It's a fictional account of the role of women. He talks about all Khoja women, Khoja Ismailis, Khoja Ithna and so on and so forth, generally. In terms of what they did, they were partners in business when they landed. By the way, they did not all come together. They had to wait years before they were able to join their husbands. But when they did come, and then some were raised families and they were born there, but they were active partners in community building, active partners in business, and active partners in the propagation of faith. So their role has been absolutely crucial. Sometimes in a society that we live in, this is not acknowledged as much as it should be, and we need to redress it, and it is being redressed. But
Right.
I'll give you my own personal example in terms of the influence that one of the key teachers where I grew up in Moshi was Amina Masi, for example. She was a teacher of three generations. She taught my mother, she taught me, and she also taught my daughter when she was very young, when she was
Yeah.
still in Moshi. And these were the kind of women who took it upon themselves those responsibilities of religious education as well as being partners in business. So their role has been equal to that of men, though not documented well and though not sometimes acknowledged. And I think
Right.
that needs to be redressed.
Okay. I'm gonna skip my last question to you and simply state the quote that I put down in the interest of time and in the interest of getting people other people to be able to ask you questions. But in the final part of the documentary, you state something that caught my attention. That when you ask the question, what will our community look like in 10, 20, 50 years' time? You went on to state the spirit of inquiry is what characterized those early Khojas, not accepting the status quo, not just in matters of faith, but life itself. We need to keep that spirit alive in order to progress. End of quote. So I'll leave it at that. I think that's significant for people to mull over and think about. And I'll now turn it over to the audience to see if they have some questions for us. I'm just going to check the text function to see if we have anything. The chat function, no, there's nothing here at the moment, and I don't see any hands up. So we'll give it a second. But in the meantime, if the audience have any questions, any thoughts, any inquiries, please let me know now so that I can let you in to ask Dr. Hasnain, or just text them to me in the chat function. While they do that, Hasnain Bhai, any thoughts on that last statement? The spirit of inquiry is what characterized those early Khojas.
Well, the question, what will our community look like in 10, 20, 50 years' time? And thank you for quoting that paragraph. You know, this is a very interesting question, as I alluded to when we began, that we seem to have that spirit of inquiry very vibrant for everything but for our faith. We will Google, even if you buy a jar of tea, we'll go ahead and Google everything around it and read the reviews, compare prices before we will actually make our informed decision about buying, a box of tea.
Yeah.
And it goes across, with Google and reviews and all that. Sometimes I feel, and I say this again with the greatest of humility, that we seem to be satisfied with the status quo. I think many of our thinkings, our ritual, our practices need to be revisited, reevaluated, for us to get a sense of where we are at. And I will quote this passage, and I'll invite those who visit our premises at MARC to look out for that quote. It's on the wall, on the Khoja wall that we have at MARC. And this is a quote, and you will know who wrote that. But this is an apt quote to this question, and that is that we need to meet the challenges of the day not with an unquestioning observance to convention, nor with the fascination of the novel, but with a spirit of revitalizing the pristine Islamic values and traditions. And we must seek to enhance our society through concepts that derive their nourishment from the spirit of Islam, which are at the same time fitting to the needs of time.
Okay.
I think that is something that the community needs to.
Indeed. Indeed it is. Thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions now. The first is that came through by text, and actually a second one came through just now. We also have a couple of people wanting to raise their hands. So, firstly, is the team, I assume the MARC team or the Khoja Heritage team, planning to have a trip to East Africa to trace the Khoja migration?
Indeed, we've run 3 trips so far to go to our roots in India, the Khoja Heritage Project of the World Federation. And there has been a discussion in terms of visiting East Africa, particularly, Bagamoyo, Zanzibar, and or Kigoma, and those places where, we put our roots down. So there is a possibility, and, look out for announcements, from the KHP of the World Federation for those tours that we may want to arrange. So that's one answer. But at the same time, these tours are all dependent on the level of interest that we get, and we'll be more than happy to organize such tours if there is sufficient interest.
Okay. Next in order was Dr. Hussein Kimji, who put up his hand. I think he wants to come on in. So Hussein Bhai, I'll just see if I can unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Yes, okay.
Oh, you're there. Okay, great. Go ahead.
All right, I can't see the screen, but anyway, Dr. Walji, assalamu alaikum. So good to see you. Excellent presentation. Thank you very, very much. I just have, two quick, questions to ask. Well, one quick question and one just observation. The greatest achievement, from you, which we can, touch and feel and see, is really, the resource center, that you have established. This has been excellent, so far. And there have been many exhibitions, quite a few exhibitions, that we have done, and it has really worked out quite well. My other question was, that when Mulla Karbalai, asked the delegation that had come for ziyarat, and the delegation replied in the first question, they replied, "We are here because of Kisma." The second time, he still asked the question, insisted to get a proper answer, and he said Taqdeer. And the third time he said Nasib. I was just wondering, that had Mulla Karbalai not insisted on getting the proper answer, maybe we would not have been guided as much as we were only after Mulla Karbalai, insisted and got the proper answer that, coming for ziyarat is 70 times better than going for Hajj, which is only once. I was also wondering as to what kind of reply did actually Mulla Karbalai gave to them. Do you know the exact words? I've got the book. Let me just put it.
Okay.
I've, got the book, and I would actually recommend, for everyone, to get the book. But if you can just explain as briefly as you can about what kind of reply did Mulla Karbalai give to this.
Yeah. Okay, Hussein Bhai, if you could take that question, but as concisely as possible, because now the questions are flowing in by the dozen, and we don't have a lot of time. So please go ahead and respond to Dr. Kimji as concisely as you can. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words, Hussein Bhai, on MARC. It's a team effort, alhamdulillah. In terms of the second question that you asked, what did Mulla Qadir Husain respond? The book goes into long passages of discussion on Aqidah and all that between Devji Jamal and the entire entourage. But what is important is, and the question that you asked to say, what would have happened if Mulla Qadir Husain had not persisted? I think Allah guides. Maybe Allah sent Mulla Qadir Husain, he may have sent somebody else, but the Qadir Husain became that Zariya for us to be introduced to the Mujtahid of the time, Ayatollah Zainul Abidin Mazandarani, and it's what Mulla Qadir Husain did, that he took this delegation to meet the Mujtahid in his presence. They explained, and it was then that Ayatollah Mazandarani asked Qadir Husain Karbalai to go to Bombay and to do that. So it was his act, as much as what he said is important for our history.
Okay. Next question is from a gentleman by the name of Ghulam Bas, and he's asking, which part of Gujarat was Murabbi Nasir Virji from?
I can only hazard a guess because Alidina Visram and Nasir Virji were related, and therefore they were both from Kera. But I see that we've got Qurban Bhai Virji.
Yes, I noticed that too.
So maybe he can answer that question.
Qurban uncle, welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Are you able to answer that definitively for us? For everyone's benefit, Qurban Bhai Virji is a descendant of the Nasir Virji family.
Yes, Nasir Virji and Alidina Visram had a relation. They worked together in Zanzibar, and then they were doing the business together. And then Alidina Visram decided to go to Uganda to develop his business, and Nasir Virji started doing business in Tanzania, in Tanganyika.
Yeah.
Nasir Virji's sister was married to Alidina Visram. So Alidina Visram was the brother-in-law of Nasir Virji.
Right. Do you know where in Gujarat Nasir Bhai came from? exactly?
Nasir, I come from Kutch.
Oh, he was from Kutch. Okay. All right. The question came, which
Kutch,
part of
yeah.
Gujarat was he from? Okay. Thank you very much, Gurban, uncle.
No,
Thank you very much. All right. Next question from Mark said, is there going to be a furthering of the documentary to involve East Africa and further to Europe and North America?
Okay, we have included East Africa in the first documentary quite extensively. We've also produced a Gujarati version of the documentary, which now has focus on Madagascar. So those areas have been covered. As for the rest, it will, I guess, depend on the people who take over after me to continue with this legacy of documenting our history through films, through videos. But I personally don't have any specific plans, although the Council of European Jamaats have requested that we perhaps look at expanding this to Europe and hopefully to North America. If there are sufficient people who are ready to do this work, I'm willing to join the team.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is from Sister Shabnam Jaffer. Our ancestors did remarkably well in preserving our cultures over 50 years in 3 continents. What can we do to preserve our partially lost culture and heritage in the Western world?
That requires a very, very long answer. However, very succinctly and briefly, if we are able to create, and this is what the KHP is trying to do, at least create an empathy and understanding by the upcoming generation towards their heritage, towards their culture, by providing them with opportunities to learn more, would be, the very first step towards being able to preserve this, what Sister Shabnam calls, a partially lost culture. The other issue, which again has vexed us for many, many years, is the preservation of the vernacular, be it Kutchi, be it Gujarati, whatever, or Sindhi, whatever the languages may be. And also the connection with the subcontinent, both with India and Pakistan. And the tours that we are arranging are also part and parcel of that particular theme of being able to recreate an understanding and empathy towards our heritage.
We have 3 more questions at the moment. The next one is from Sister Zina Thirji. How to redesign our ritual practices to meet current needs of the community and make it relevant?
Once again, I would say that this is beyond my pay grade. I would leave this to the scholars of the community to respond to that question. But what I would say is that whatever we do, I believe we need to do it by understanding the essence of every ritual that we do and take the time to spiritually nourish ourselves through these rituals and understand them. I think that's our own responsibility and not the responsibility of the member of the community. Each one of us has to strive to do this, as they say in Gujarati, meaning that you cannot go to paradise unless you die yourself.
Yeah.
So,
well said. Personal responsibility is key here. Next question is from Philip Brookmeyer, who joins us from Vienna, Austria. Did Mulla Qadir Husain leave any other Urdu texts or just the autobiography? If the Urdu original is lost, where does information about it come from? Is it contained in the preface of the Gujarati translation?
Okay, great question, and thanks for joining, Philip. I know that you've been following the Khoja history for a long time. It's again great to connect with you. Mulla Qadir Husain had several religious texts that he published, and those are again not found. We only see references to them. The information that came, the very first translation that was done by by the editor of Samachar, Jan Mohammad Fazil Master, he must have had the original Urdu book to have been able to translate. But we have not been able to locate that book. If anybody has information, we'd love to get it. So There is nothing in the preface that says where the information came from. We can only presume that the Urdu was translated, by the very first translator from Urdu to Gujarati, and now we have the two Gujarati versions of, Fazl Jan Muhammad Master, as well as the one by Askar Wadia of Apni Dunya.
Thank you. A question from Shokat Bhai Molu. How can Khojas neutralize the comments by certain alims, zakirs, that promotion of Khoja identity drowns out the Islamic identity that we Khojas should champion?
I think that's a great question by Shokat Bhai in terms of responding towards Khoja identity. And this is not only from alims and zakirs. This comes across from many, many different quarters, even from our own. And my response to that is, it's a matter of education. What we are saying is that we are part of the 200 million Shias out there, very much part of it. The World Federation is a known institution in the Shia world for the work that it does for all the Shias of the world and humanity in general. I believe that we need to educate people to say that while we are part of the wider Shia milieu, we as Shias should be, and I give this simile, of a salad bowl and a bowl of soup. We don't need to assimilate our own identities into one. We have Afghani Shias, we have many other Kashmiri Shias, and so on and so forth. So we are Khoja Shias, and we should remain as a nice salad bowl, each culture reflecting its richness, its color. And as long as we understand that no particular culture is superior to any other culture, then we have a solid ground to meet any particular negativity towards maintaining our identity. And I do believe that social scientists, including, in addition to social scientists, our own Mujtahid, Ayatollah Sistani, has encouraged the keeping of this identity by the community, and there is absolutely nothing wrong in having this identity strongly demonstrated by our people. It is only going to benefit us.
Thank you for that. We have a comment, some information provided by Mustafa P. As per Africa Federation Archives, Nasir Virji was born in Luni, or Luni, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, it's Luni, in 1865. Nasir Virji grew up in Ratadia. In 1879, he set sail for Zanzibar. And then next, a comment from Shirin Bhai Bhamani. I don't have a question, would like to commend Brother Hasnain Bhai for a marvelous job arranging the Khoja Heritage Tour. I was there a couple of years ago and was amazed as to how well and organized and fun-filled each day was. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm glad that I went. Jazakallah. And that is it for the questions. Thank you, Hasnain Bhai. We're going to wrap up now, but thank you very much for making the time to talk to us. It's been extremely enlightening as well as enjoyable to hear, and fascinating in parts too. And in preparing for this interview, the stuff you asked me to look at and read was indeed very, very interesting. So again, thank you very much.
May I just interject with one very quick point?
Yes.
Thank you, Mustafa Pir Mahmad, for bringing to our attention the detail about Nasir Virji. Just to plug this for Mustafa Bhai. Mustafa Pir Mahmad is one of those individuals who's taken it upon himself to trace the genealogy of the Khoja community. And please do connect with him, engage with him. And Mustafa, if you can put your email on the chat here so people can connect with you, so they can send you their family history and so on and so forth. It's commendable work that's being done by Mustafa Bhai. And thank you, Shabir, thank you, the MARC team, and thank you, viewers, for bearing with me for this last hour. And it's been interesting receiving those questions.
You're very welcome. I do have one question or hand up from Muhammad Mauladina. Muhammad Bhai, I'll let you in if I can in a few minutes, but in the interest of time, I do need to preview our next session. On Saturday, December 5th, we have the pleasure of being joined by none other than Mr. M.G. Vasanji. the internationally acclaimed novelist and writer, the author of such books as The Gunny Sack, The Magic of Saida, and for those Dar es Salaam and Zanzibaris amongst you, And Home Was Kariako. Mr. Vasanji, as I said, is internationally acclaimed. He's won several awards for his work, and he'll be joining us on December 5th to talk about his work as a novelist, as well as to talk about the early Khojas who came into Africa and settled in, and where they came from in India. So it'll be a very interesting chat. I hope you'll all be able to join us. Please invite your friends, and those of you who haven't had the pleasure of reading his books before, I highly commend them to you. M.G. Vasanji, the writer of several novels. So while we still have the broadcast with Zoom, I said earlier that Muhammad Maulidina wanted to ask a quick question. Hasnain Bhai, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. Muhammad Bhai, can you? Yes, go ahead, Muhammad Bhai.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, at that time when I raised my hand, there weren't any questions on the chat. So basically, I just wanted to actually make a comment to thank you so much, Shabir Bhai, for arranging this very, very interesting and informative Zoom session on behalf of MARC. You started this with a very right person, Hasnain Bhai, of course, who is a pioneer in our Khoja history. And I think 30 minutes was not enough at all, in my opinion, but maybe he'll come back again. But I joined in a little late, so I wasn't sure in his introduction whether, he has played very important role, as we all know, in the community, especially the World Federation. So, thank you, Hasnain Bhai, for that as well. From 1976, I believe, he started as a Secretary General, then Vice President, and then President. He took over from Mullah Sahab and led for 2 terms. And so again, just wanted to thank Hasnain Bhai for that since I have this platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Muhammad Bhai. A couple of comments just came in. Anyone wishing to include his ancestry can email me, meaning the ancestors' names will soon get lost. So this is an attempt to record. Oh, it's actually Mustafa Bir Muhammad. Anyone wishing to include his ancestry can email him at that email address. And with that, Hasnain Bhai, I think we will close it, unless you have any parting words for us.
No, once again, thank you all. Keep connected. Keep connected with our community, with the work that we do with MARC and the Khoja Heritage Project, and we look forward to serving you. Thank you very much.
And to everyone listening, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and Khudafis.